I'm here analyzing a game that Magnet21 submitted. This was played on a time control of a move every 3 days, so it's a postal chess game, or as they call it now, online or turn-based. And this is for the member best game thread. And it's a very, very interesting game, and I'm going to be able to offer quite a bit of insight in here. Let's just see what happened. Okay, let's run through the moves. Okay, and he gives some comments here. Apparently this was a thematic tournament, and this is the starting position. So black can choose just about any defense he wishes. Okay, he chooses to go into Queen's Gambit declined, and white plays a solid but passive variation. But there are going to be a lot of poison to it, and all that's beyond the scope of this video. And this gives chances to go into the semi-Tarrasch defense. And I kind of think that white underestimated black here. And one thing I want to say, to me, this game is a perfect example of what happens when you stop and you take your time. There's no gross blunders. There's just some strategic errors on both sides, and we'll discuss those as they arise. But a number of these games that I'm making videos for, even the turn-based ones, it's very clear that one side or both sides is just seeing the position. They have a move, they look at it for a few minutes and reply. And as I've been teaching, I played what we affectionately known as postal chess, a term that's gone the way of the dodo bird and the dinosaur, so to speak. Who plays that way by postcard? Well, I did. It was the only way to play if you're going to play. And yeah, games last a long time. It wasn't uncommon to have a game last well over a year and up to 3 years if they were European. Some of the mail to the old countries behind the Iron Curtain, it took a while to get it over there and get it back. But what can you do? Well, the answer is you can't. That's how you played. And that gives you even more time to sit and analyze the position when it's not your move. If you're playing the right game load where you're comfortable with, you can stop and start looking at games when it's not your move and anticipating variations that you want to play depending upon what your opponent does. So white makes, I think, a poor choice here. And black says, allowing me to develop with tempo. Nice. And a lot of times, like for instance in the Queen's Gambit accepted, and this can transpose to that still, black often develops this king bishop once, and then it takes, and white gains a tempo on it. But here, black doesn't even have to spend that tempo. And the solid rule that I mentioned in a lot of views or a lot of these videos is, don't make exchanges that develop your opponent's pieces. Okay, I've done it plenty of times. I probably still do it when I'm not thinking, but this just improves the position of the black pieces. That's all. So black has got a piece out and white doesn't. So white's advantage of the first move is virtually non-existent. Okay, now we enter the realm of what we call the isolated queen pawn. And I've known some people that are expert at playing this type of position. They will accept the isolated queen pawn. And this isn't one of those particular positions. If the e pawn is back on e2, in some cases, if white can advance that isolated queen pawn, it really puts a cramp in the opponent's position. Well, this isn't one of them. Ideally, white wants to blockade on d4, and if he does that, black has that long-lasting weakness that may come back and bite him in the ending. But in the meantime, black gets a lot of free play for his pieces. And let's just compare right now, just for instructive purposes. Let's compare the queen bishops. Okay, I've highlighted them in red. Black's queen bishop has plenty of mobility. The white one doesn't. I got into a position with an isolated queen pawn. I think it came out of an English opening. One of these days I'll have to dig that up and make a video of it. But I accepted the isolated queen pawn, and against a 2100 player, it was played over the board back in 1986. And I played a really nice game and just maneuvered my pieces very well and just crushed him. that game itself shows a lot of the potential one can do when they play with the isolated queen pawn. And we'll talk more about some of these pawn structures here in a bit. A whole new pawn structure is going to come up in a few moves, and we'll discuss it. Okay, so now bishop b5. Now, here, black comments, this was probably a substandard move. I was taking an early aim at h2. He plays his bishop d6. Okay, I was taking an early aim at h2. Since white was clearly going to castle on the king side, probably better would have been just develop a knight f6, or maybe even knight e7. And I agree with that. Why should black be trying to checkmate white in this position? Well, yeah, we want to win by checkmate, but we don't have firepower on the board. The queen is probably the one that's going to do it, but it can't even get to h4 because that square is covered. So I agree, knight f6 is preferred. So both sides have given a tempo to the other side. So now the advantage of the first move is tipped back to white. So let's see. Okay, let's get down to the next. I want to cover his comments and discuss them. Very well annotated game on white's part. And we'll get to some of this here in a little bit, some of these nuances. Okay, so they just do what they're supposed to do, develop, and black castles, and he says here, so I still have to develop 3 or so pieces, but so does white. And here's the pieces. And the big question is this rook developed? That's an interesting question. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. I think it just depends on the position. So I agree, 3 or 4 pieces. Oh, we've shown the next move accidentally. But we're going to get there anyway. And this is simply a bad move on white's part. It's one of these things they call in tennis an unforced error. Nothing was making black or white take that pawn, and now, or take that knight. Now white's given up his better bishop for a knight. So he ceded the bishop pair to black, and the isolated queen pawn is no more. But we have something new in a new pawn structure, and it's called the hanging pawns. Okay, let's look at the position. White has 2 pawn islands, black has 3. And if you don't know what a pawn island is, there's one of them. See, they're all connected. They can make a pawn chain and all protect each other. Okay, right? And black has 3 pawn islands. And just as a general rule, if you have fewer pawn islands than your opponent, you're a little better off in that respect. But here, the gain that white has gained by giving black the extra pawn island is offset by for a lot of reasons. Number one, I think, is the fact that black has the 2 bishops. Okay, so strategically it wasn't a good choice by white, and white makes another poor move. He plays h3, and here I've got here. Is he afraid of knight h4? Is it justified? And he says, I don't know. I know you're a big advocate against these types of moves. Probably white had nothing to worry about as long as he kept the knight guarding h2, but there's also the bishop pin, giving up my bad bishop for the knight. Something to think about. Okay, of course, those 2 possibilities cannot exist simultaneously. So let's just talk about this position for just a second. It's an unforced error. What should white be doing? Well, completing his development. Okay. B3 sticks out. That provides a square for the bishop to go to, and then suddenly the bishop has a decent diagonal. And once the bishop's moved, the queen can find a new home, even on e2, and it'll just let him pin it, and then the rooks are connected, and one can go to d1 and one can go to c1, and that's a perfectly logical setup. Here, let's just examine it. We'll just play some lines. Now, since he was afraid of Bishop G4, I'm not sure I would play that. You'll see why when I get into it. We'll just go ahead and play it. Now, White goes about his business. Now, Black could try Queen C7 here. Okay, there's pluses and minuses about it. It threatens to win a pawn, but now is the time that White will now kick that bishop. Okay, and then bring the queen up to E2. Okay, now this is fine for White. Now we have again a kind of a symmetrical position in terms of development. Both sides have developed their 3 minor pieces and their queen, and the rooks are connected. The back ranks are exact mirror images of each other. So it's Black to move. Well, let's put a rook on the open file. Notice that Black could try the maneuver knight d7, knight e5. He could try that, but that takes some time. I just want to develop and just show you some of the potential here. Now White gets rook c1 in, and then White has this little threat here. The threat is knight b5, taking advantage of the pin, and then getting rid of that annoying bishop on d6. So Black has to stop and deal with that. We'll just pick a move. Let's come over to e2 or e7, okay? And then White develops another piece. Now maybe it's still too early to go for this maneuver, so let's overprotect c6. Let's get something on that. And now it's White's move. What's he going to do? Let's see. We can probably welcome getting a. Don't mind so much this double pawn if it happens. White's. Let's see. Just kind of think of a move. Well, White ends up playing something like this later. Let's go ahead and get it in now. Okay, now what can Black do to upset the apple cart? Well, you play, like I say, play knight d7. That helps keep the knight out. Now the idea is to play the knight here. Okay. Well, maybe now's the time White can actually get away with g4. It loosens his king's position up a little bit, but it frees the pin on this knight, and now the knight's able to assume an active role. Now there's a threat on this pawn that Black may find uncomfortable. So good things happen when you develop your pieces, and this game is it's hard to say who's better. Really, it's dynamically equal. Both sides have winning and losing chances. So this is just one possible line, and you can, if you want to analyze a position, the simplest way to try to analyze is put pieces on squares where they get developed. If you're not sure what to do, develop them. You know, these moves aren't hard to find. I'm not focused on any tricks or stuff. You know, when I was a new player, I used to try to find some tricks if they were in the position. Could I go threaten a cute mate? Which, of course, my opponent wouldn't allow. But let's back it up and get to the main idea here that's coming up with these hanging pawns. So White played h3, and like I say, that's just not good. And let me get to the right point on the PGN. Let's see. You know what? This one, like I say, one problem with this chess.com, when you go into a sideline, it gets really hard to find the main line. So I tend to want to replace things. Just reload it. Okay, now it's reloaded. Then I don't have that line crawling at me. Rook e8. Okay, that's fine. Get the rook into play. a3. Here's another move. And then White comments, or Black comments, there he goes again. I hadn't begun to watch your videos at the time of this game yet. I felt this was good for me. It had nothing, as I had nothing to go to. They could go to b4. Well, this bishop could go b4, but this is really it's just a wasted move. What can I say? Well, White just doesn't know what to do here. Sometimes you don't know what to do. You just waste moves, and Black should just continue his development. Now, a5 is an interesting idea, but I'm gonna show the right way to play this position. Okay, it's it's a kind of position that can arise out of a number of openings, primarily the Tartakower variation of the Queen's Gambit declined. That's the one where black plays an early b6. And I believe the correct move to play here is bishop b7. Now that doesn't look good. Well, it's got no mobility, right? Well, hang on, I'll explain it. Okay, the next step black wants to do is advance this pawn to c5, and then you have the formation that you want. You have the classic hanging pawns formation. Okay, now usually I don't recommend people look at study master games, but there's one game I can point you to, and I will in just a second, which and it's easy to find, which explains the well, it doesn't explain. I'll get to that. There's an annotated version of this game, which probably you can't find. I think Jeremy Silman did it. I could be mistaken. I'll tell the story. I like to tell stories. There was this publication back in circa 1980-81. It ran for a few years, called Players Chess News. It was published by a friend of mine named Reiner Rickford in Hollywood. And in essence, what he did was every fortnight he produced a chess newspaper, and he would get submitted to him all of the latest master games, and then some he would publish with annotations, and some he would publish just a raw game score. And they even reconfigured their typewriter, because they typed these things. Computers and word processors weren't around. They can reconfigure their typewriter so it had figurine algebraic notation, because this thing was big. I mean, there's nothing else like it. It was just really unique. You had Chess Informant at this time, and then you had the Players Chess News. And the thing about Players Chess News is it was more current, and the Informant came out every 6 months from Yugoslavia. But at various times he had several strong players working for him. I think someone was with him at this time. Larry Christensen later did a term of employment there. I remember going out there February of '83, and Christensen was working that day, so I got the chance to talk to him and catch up on old things. We're not good friends, but we know each other. We've known each other since we were in high school. But he's always friendly, and you can always maybe get a secret or two out of him if you prod him. You can get him to show you something useful. But anyway, so I think Silman was the one that annotated this game. I can't remember, but the reason I know this game so well is another interesting story. I had a friend that was chess playing friend who had done something, made a mistake, and ended up in prison. And he refused to learn algebraic notation, so I was being a nice guy, and I was submitting him game scores, and I was translating them to English descriptive notation so he could read them and play them over. And okay, the game in question, it's one you can find. It's Korchnoi versus Karpov. It's the first match game of their second World Championship match. It's also known as the Massacre in Murano. Korchnoi just fell apart and got slaughtered. And in the first round, or the first match game, Korchnoi had the white pieces in a similar position, and Karpov had the hanging pawns. So, you learn a lot when you write something down. Students learn by doing. That's why I put you to work analyzing games, because you learn by doing. I learned a lot about this opening just from transcribing those moves and the notes. And what essentially happened was Karpov just played this very, very solid game, and as the annotator commented, he said black just slowly started improving his position, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's a tactical possibility of when black has his two pawns up on his fourth rank, that this pawn on d5 can advance to d4, and suddenly the attack is on. And Korchnoi couldn't find a plan because Karpov was just sitting there playing good, solid positional chess. And Korchnoi fell apart, and Karpov slaughtered him. So that I can recommend looking at that game. It should be easy to find because I've told you the year and the match number, and just look at the way Karpov handled the black pieces in that game. and how he slowly was gradually improving his position, making it solid, and then eventually, bang, the tactics flew. So obviously, it's something that Black didn't know because he had the possibility to go into this line here a couple of times, and we'll see it. And what separates the wins from the losses, or the wins from the draws sometimes, is knowing when to go in the right position. You may, there's probably a lot of positions that maybe I could go into that the masters have already proven strategically, or the grandmasters have proven are strategically winning for one side because they offer all these chances. And maybe I've missed them because I don't know enough about master theory. Well, you don't need to know a lot about master theory. You just need to know what's important. And right now, that's analyzing your games and getting there. And building up your solid play. Then you can go in when you get to master. Then it's time to study master games, grandmaster games. That's the time to do it, because now you're aiming for higher. Like my course says, I'll get you up to my level. Beyond that, that's up to you. But you're ready to go. So then you're going to start. If you get that high, then you're starting to prepare for certain opponents, looking at their games, finding what their strengths and weaknesses are, what their openings are. Try to find a fly in the ointment and steal the point from him, even if he's better. You're on your way up, and these guys are your targets. So anyway, that's it. That's basically the story with the hanging pawns. And had Black known this, he could have gone into this, and who knows what would have happened. A well-prepared Black would know about that game with Korchnoi and Karpov and would understand how to handle it. Now, there's one major difference, though, between this game here in front of us and the game that Korchnoi and Karpov played, and that's that Karpov didn't have the bishop pair. Okay, that's the difference. Karpov didn't have the bishop pair, and Black has it, so he wants to be able to use them at the right time. Okay, now. So this is basically the theme, and let's just back up one move here. Notice that tactically, Black can even play c5 now. White cannot win the pawn on d5 because he's going to lose his queen. c5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5. Let's get some more arrows in there. And then Black to play has bishop h2 check, and that queen sitting there on d5 is a goner. Okay, so Black could play c5 in this position, but bishop b7 is fine. Which would be better? I was first recommending bishop b7. Well, maybe c5. Give White a chance to blow it, right? If you can. But the bishop in this position belongs on c5. But it's interesting to say the least. But oh, dang it. Okay, back it up. So what? So which is more accurate, bishop b7 or c5? Maybe c5 is. That'll stop. That could stop b4. Does Black want to play b4? Or does White want to play b4? I always mix Black and White up. I just can't get them straight. Okay, c5. Does he want to play b4 here? Well, he's going to drop a pawn. It looks like, so he can't. Let's suppose he wants to get b4 in. Okay, now that prepares it. Well, now we can play a5. Okay, but the bishop belongs on b7. You want the long diagonal because of the tactical possibilities of d4, and Karpov got it in and just tore Korchnoi apart. That was really sad. Anyway. The game probably with correct play would have been a draw. Karpov defended it, handled the position just perfectly. But anyway, so I'm saying c5 directly is probably a better move. If you play bishop b7, I don't know. You can go a5 now. Now you're threatening to win a pawn. If he plays here, hey, you got the hanging pawns. Now, White's wasting a lot of time securing a protected pass pawn. It's something to analyze. I don't know. This video is going to be long, I can tell it, because it's a good game. Okay, so you know something about the hanging pawns, and you can learn more by looking up that one game and seeing what happened. Okay, so I'm not sure where we're at, so it's time to reload the PGN so I don't mess this up. and then we'll get to the right position. Okay, so a3, a5, now bishop d2. Now that's just such an ugly bishop. Anyway, there was comments after a3. There he goes again. I hadn't, or did I say all this? I'm also giving my light squared bishop a nice watch post on the a file. So he's going to put it on a6 and watch down that diagonal. Well, this is a better diagonal because there's a king down there. Okay, no problem. There's nothing wrong with this play. It's just sometimes there's a better one. There's better strategies, and that can mean all the difference. Okay, so white finally develops something, but clearly the black bishops are better. Well, I agree. He says he thinks. Well, they are better. And there's two of them. And right now they're almost what we call Harwitz bishops, where they're working in adjacent diagonals and raking against the enemy king. So it's definitely, black definitely wants to keep the bishops on the board. Okay, so let's go forward. So bishop a6 forces the rook over here. Now rook b8, which attacks the pawn. And what's interesting, black can still go into the hanging pawns formation and bring the bishop back to b7, but he doesn't. And here's probably his last chance. He says, this is a rather annoying move. Where'd it go? I lost it. Okay, there it is. You can't see the PGN. The screen isn't going that wide. Okay, this is a rather annoying move, but that arises in these types of position. At least to me, that hole on c5 sure looks inviting, and I couldn't figure out a way of kicking him out except by taking later. Well, you do have a way to get out of there, and that's to accept the hanging pawn. Okay? Accept the hanging pawns, and you figured it out. It's that simple. Okay. The classical Tartakower hanging pawns. Okay, so anyway, queen c7 was good. It develops. Now, still do it. You still play c5. But now, you see, now the drawback is, in this position, does white have a threat? The threat seems to be a4, and that bishop could get embarrassed. And it's got d3, but then there's a desperado with bishop takes a5. So black has had such potential with the hanging pawns, but now he feels inclined to give back the bishop pair. Was there an alternative? A4 is a threat. A candidate move might be knight d7, but I'd like to keep the two bishops, but I know this video is going to get long, so I'm going to just leave that to white to check out, see if there's any other alternatives, since the hanging pawns formation is pretty much gone. But still, black's okay here. Black's still better. We're down to both sides have a queen bishop, and the black queen bishop is better. It's just that simple. Okay, so attacks the rook and drives him back. Now he gives himself a triple question mark on this next move. I wouldn't be so brutal, but it is a mistake. Okay, he took the bishop, and he says, looking back on this move, I don't know what I was thinking. What was I afraid of? Bishop c3 with later queen d4 threatening mate? Well, maybe. Some people just grab bishops for knights without thinking. Oops. Trying to see the rest of these notes. He says, and it doesn't seem likely that white's going to get that set up because the knight's posted on e4 and unable to be kicked out, at least temporarily. I think I was simplifying things, reasoning that I was better, but it was a dumb choice, as I was better probably before this move, but not later. Okay, so good words. I tend to agree you were better until that move, but not later. So what's happened? Okay, what's happened is we've lost our bishop pair back. It's kind of an unforced error. Excuse me. It's kind of an unforced error. What should black be trying to do here? Well, one thing we can think about are endgames, and it's going to get an ending later. What endings do we want? Well, one drawback is the hanging pawns can become a weakness if you get to an ending. That's why you want to keep them on the board as long as you can. I mean, keep your pieces on the board as long as you can. They could be a liability, but the black knight is clearly better than the bishop. So a knight versus bishop ending looks good for black. You don't want to trade knights necessarily, even though the old rule is when you have opposite colored bishops, if there's more material on the board, the attacking side is a piece ahead. Well, if you just imagine the knight's off the board, it looks to me like white can do more with his bishop because it'll go to c3, and that knight's not there to chop it off if it has to. And then white will have the more active bishop, and this bishop on b5 is not able to operate on this long diagonal. Okay, so you don't want to trade knights here. Now, do you want a bishop versus knight ending? Bishop's a long-range piece. Ideally, yeah, you do. So that's good. So you trade your bishop for the knight, or but then again, that's what they're going to end up with. But you don't want to get there too quick. In other words, what black should do is not trade any more pieces at all. Don't trade knights for bishops. Don't trade bishops for knights. Keep those options open, but try to see what you can do with what you have left. And it's a little tough because the attrition is taking its toll here on black's winning chances. So he really misses that dark squared bishop. It could have come in so handy in a lot of ways. But then it would have come in more handy had black taken the hanging pawns, as I suggested, and that bishop on b5 was back on b7. So black should probably start trying to occupy b3. That's a weak square. Instead of taking the bishop, let's consider playing bishop c4. The idea is we're going to plunk it down on b3, or we're going to plunk our rook down on b3, one or the other. And if we plunk the bishop there, maybe white will play on knight d4 and trade it off. Let's look at a possible line on that. Okay, white gets a move. Okay, what's he going to do? Let's stop you from going to b3. Oh, no, this pawn hangs. Dang it. Can't do that directly. Okay, we got to stop and deal with the pawn. How are we going to do it? Play b5, or b4 rather. That kind of does it, doesn't it? Okay, well now, if you take with the pawn, you get the a file. If you take with the bishop, you get c5 in. And white opposes. And let's see. Just bring the queen over to b7 and get ready to take it. And bring this rook over. That's a start. Okay, so that's assuming white plays b4. Okay, let's suppose he guards the pawn. Allows us to do what we want to do. Okay, we plunk the bishop in. Now we bring the queen. Let's put it here. Now let's anchor it in because I'm trying to get to something, to a point here. I want this pawn on the opposite color of that bishop. Now we play here, and let's see. We want to take back on b3 with the rook. That's what we want. So let's play this useful move. Rook here. The point, it's not a forced line. I'm just preserving an option of doubling. Although, no. Once you take back with the rook, you don't have to do that. Let's see if we can improve the queen position. Let's put the queen here. It's a central square. It keeps an eye on b2. Okay, so now we've gotten rid of that guy. And now, like I say, we have this ideal knight versus a good knight versus a kind of a weak bishop. So what's White going to do? Rook c1, counterplay. Well, now we throw c5 in. Maybe not. F3 might force. No, F3 is no good. You're winning. Knight takes d2, and then something takes on e3, and Black's got to be winning that, even if White gets some counterplay. Let's see. Let's look at it. F3. Okay, take. I don't know. This looks shaky as all heck for White. Black's on the 7th rank, threatening to play queen e3 check. He doesn't have time for rook takes here. So where's the queen go? You can't let that queen into e3. But now, look, Black's tripled on the... Oh, wow. No, you don't have time for rook e1 check. There's going to be a back rank mate staring at you. But, gosh, Black has to be clearly better here. Wow, what about queen g3? How does White handle that? Answer is he doesn't. You know, now you got to be careful. You don't have time for rook e1 yet, but you threaten to. h6. Now the threat is rook e1, so he's got to bring this back. Now, gosh, this is just killing. You know, Black's rook e2, rook d2, rook e1. I don't know. Who would you rather play here? I'd rather be Black. Well, let's just shove this pawn for want of anything else. And maybe there's better moves here, but who would you rather play here? Well, obviously you'd rather play Black. Okay, so that's just one line. There's plenty of other lines. So how should Black proceed? Well, that's how. And maybe it's not accurate. Maybe there's something wrong. Maybe with best play, White can equalize against it. But anyway, he took the knight or the bishop. See, I mix up bishop and knights too. I just can't win. Okay, so now he says there's a cheap threat. White was threatening to play queen takes d5 because there's a pin. And now actually the white knight looks a little better than the bishop simply because Black has some pawns on light squares. And now it looks like White's getting somewhere. White just grabbed a pawn. Well, Black's grabbed a pawn too, but now that pawn on d5 is isolated again. And he makes a comment here. After a couple of dumb moves, I was being punished. I was afraid after this move, and I was thinking I took too many days exploring. Well, you have 3 days exploring variations before I settled on the following, which luckily my opponent followed suit. Okay, so it looks like White solved his problems. He's gotten rid of that bad bishop, and now he's got an active rook, and now he's winning a pawn. So Black comes up, concocts a defense here. But one drawback is the winning chances for Black have pretty much vanished. Black's down a pawn and fighting to draw. And he comes up with an interesting tactic here. Take my queen, I'll take yours. And that's what happens. Things will start getting kind of tactical. Okay, let's go a little further. G6, get rid of that back rank. Maybe not the best move. It's putting another pawn on White, but then it's taking a square away from the Black knight, so or the White knight. See, I can't get White and Black right. Okay, dyslexia strikes. Okay, rook a6, and White shouldn't be trading rooks here. I think he should keep his pieces on the board. That was such a good rook on the 7th rank. Why get rid of it? The Black rook on e8 isn't going anywhere. Simple winning strategy to play for the win is just put the knight back on d4, where it's a permanent outpost. If you play knight d, if White plays knight d4 here, that knight's there for the duration. White never has to move it again if he doesn't want to, and the only way Black is going to get rid of it is to give up the exchange. I don't know, maybe rook a8, maybe you win that pawn. But as you'll see, white had some legitimate winning chances coming up. So I don't know if knight d4 is any good. It's something for Magnet to have a look at. Okay, so, but I don't like that move, but there's probably a better move. Maybe not. Maybe black's going to double up and win that, so he has to do this. Anyway, let's see what happens. He trades, tempos the knight, moves the king up. Now there's a tactic here. Okay, so it looks like I'm regaining the pawn, but then not so, of course. White has a tactic. Now, let me just back up here for a moment. If black loses that d pawn, he has legitimate losing chances. Now, what are his best drawing chances if he trades the a pawn for the d pawn? Well, the best drawing chances are in a rook ending. A rook and 4 pawns against a rook and 3 pawns is probably a draw, but just imagine the position. Let's get the black rook off that file so that rook takes rook is not possible. But clean out. Just imagine these pieces not on the board, these pawns, these bishops, and let's assume it's black's move. The drawing move method is to play h5, and you'll have to look up rook and pawn endings. This is Smyslov and Levenfish's book, which I consider part of the Averbach series. Maybe Averbach helped on it. Anyway, I'd have to pull out the edition and look. Not important. The drawing technique is to get h5 in, and if you're white, you want to prevent him from doing that. So I think g4 is kind of the idea. So it's not uncommon to draw a game when you have a pawn down and a rook and pawn ending. But it's not clear how you're going to get rid of the bishops and the knights here, or the bishop and the knight and those pawns. So instead, black goes into a bishop versus knight ending. Let's see what he has to say. Okay, so now we get into a interesting ending. I had not studied this type of ending ever in my life, so I just had to take my time with each and every move. I learned a lot from this. I had no idea this was a technical. Had no idea if this was a technical draw or not. I just knew I was a pawn down and that I had to hold on with everything I had. Okay, so what do you think of this position? Is it a technical draw? This is the kind of position where now the bishop is worth a little more than knight simply because it's a long-range piece. But there's one thing hindering that bishop and its value as a long-range piece, and that's the absence of material on the queen side. There are no pawns over there. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, theoretically, white wins. Okay? White wins this. And I'll justify that with a statement. Now, oh wow, 45 minutes. This thing's going to go an hour easy. It's going to be a fun video. Okay, because my purpose is to educate. Let's talk a little bit about endings. There's been some interesting discussion, which I won't go into in great deal, but there's a question whether or not endgame books are allowed in these online games. And it seems like common sense will allow them, but there's a question if they're legal or not. And opening books are legal. One of the ideas, certainly table bases are not legal, but one of the ideas is that one can look up a technical win, and that's kind of an unfair advantage. But then my counter to that is, well, what about an opening trap? If so suppose I don't know an opening trap, but I'm following a book line, and I start looking at the variations, and I find this book trap, and my opponent doesn't own any opening books, and he plays right into it. Well, didn't I win the game from a book? Yes, I did. So no different than this. Well, here's the other funny thing. If you get an ending, most of your positions will not be in the book. Okay, there won't be anything close to it because there's just so many infinite number of endings and possibilities. But there are general rules. Now I use what I believe to be the best endgame material of them all. I call it the Averbach series. There's 8 volumes. There's pawn endings. There's rook endings. There's knight endings, bishop versus knight endings, rook versus minor piece endings, queen versus rook or minor piece endings, and what's left? There's 8 volumes. Any combination, one piece against another. There's a complete book written about it. And the old Soviet Union put this together. They wanted to have some kind of a manual covering all the possibilities. And what they do is they have everything broken down into chapters and with varying degrees. Now, it's good to know what the endings are and why endgame books should be allowed, because when you're examining your candidate moves, you want to know which ending to go into. Is this a win? Is this a draw? Am I worse? Which one do I have the best winning chances in? So just from that respect, you want to allow endgame books, and I have a feeling they're going to be allowed once they view all the evidence. But the key to my course is, I say, don't study something until it applies to you. In other words, if you're playing an over-the-board game and reach this ending, you were wise not to study endings. Do your best you can, then go look it up afterwards. But you want to look it up afterwards so you get an idea. And the whole logic here is to take advantage of your time. What if you spend all this time on an opening, or I'm sorry, on an ending, and you never reach it? I had a friend that took a year off chess, and he was able to study chess at work. He had a shift that he didn't have much responsibility. He could sit there and play chess all day. And he spent a whole year going over this Averbach series. And he says, I love endings. I love to play endings because I spent all this time with these books. I've looked at every line, every position, every variation. Well, the drawback was he went to play tournament chess, and he was losing his games before he got to the ending. Or the ones he was winning, he was dead winning. He never really got to use his endgame knowledge. So why study something that's not applicable? There's much more economical uses of your time, and that's what my whole program explains in lesson 1. And I said, now the time to study an ending is in a postal chess game. And this is what I was doing, and I'd try to figure this ending out in a postal game. So now you open up the book, which may not be legal just specifically yet at chess.com, but I have a feeling it will be. But this is the perfect time to learn an ending when it counts, right? This is the perfect time. So I said that white wins this. Now, how do I justify that? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out the Averbach book. I spent some time looking at it. And I got to put my reading glasses on because I can't read fine print without them. Where'd they go? There they are. Okay, so anyway, back to this game. The Averbach series doesn't, like I say, doesn't have every position, but it gives general rules. Now, first off, I'm just going to say there's a whole chapter of knight and 2 pawns versus a bishop and 1 pawn. So there's a lot of positions that they've proved are either wins or draws. And so what you want to do is be aware of what are wins and draws and try to get to one of those. Now, we're not close to it yet. White has 4 pawns, black has 3. So to get to a 2-to-1, you got to exchange a set of pawns. Okay? Right? But you got to figure out how to get there. How do you get to that position? Well, we're doing this in retrograde. We know what kind of ending we want, but how do we get there? So let's look at what they say when you get into the chapter that endings with many pawns. Let me find it. Endings with many pawns, realization of a material advantage. And the way the Averbach book is set up, first they give exploitation of an extra pawn with bishop versus knight. Well, here it's knight versus bishop, but I'm gonna skip ahead just a moment where it says exploitation of an extra pawn with knight versus bishop. Now they say if the stronger side has the knight, then the general features of the plan for realizing the material advantage are the same as with the bishop. Okay, so we're going to have to go back and read about the bishop in just a moment. Let's see what else it says. At first, one should aim to... Now this is all right out of his book. Am I violating copyright? Okay. At first, one should aim to improve as much as possible the placing of one's pieces and pawns. However, one should not be in a particular hurry to create a passed pawn, and especially to advance it. The bishop is a long-range piece, and therefore the creation of a passed pawn and its advance will in certain cases not reduce the bishop's mobility. What is important here is to weaken the opponent's pawn structure with the aim of creating intrusion points for the king towards the enemy pawns, and in order to obtain a second pass pawn. In this case, the pass pawn, or the threat of its creation, plays a basically deflecting role. It is only when the opponent is tied to the fence of his weaknesses that it normally becomes possible to advance or create a pass pawn. And then he starts giving examples which are beyond the scope of this video. So that's what Averbach says. Now let's read what the more specifics of how to realize an advantage of a bishop versus knight, because he said they're the same. So here's what he says here. Exploitation of an extra pawn with bishop versus knight. Here it is perfectly feasible to adopt the same winning plan as in endings with light-colored bishops. In other words, look at the book Bishop Endings. This plan normally consists of the following 5 steps. 1. The king and bishop take up their best positions. So you just reverse it. The king and knight take up their best positions. 2. The pawns are arranged in the most favorable way, and the formation of a pass pawn is prepared. Having arranged the pieces and pawns in the best way, a pass pawn is created, and is advanced with the support of the king. Subsequent operations depend on the defender's plan. If the opponent tries to stop the pawn with his knight, then the bishop and king drive back the knight. So reverse that for this case. The pawn queens, or else the knight is won for it. Okay, if the enemy king takes part in the battle with the pass pawn, then normally its further advance becomes impossible. In this case, exploiting the fact that the enemy king has been diverted by the pass pawn, the stronger side's king attacks the enemy pawns on the other flank, striving to obtain there a decisive material advantage. In this case, it is very important to be able to create weaknesses in the opponent's pawn formation so as to allow the king to approach the pawns. Of course, one does not always have to affect all 5 steps of this plan. Each concrete situation may have its own peculiarities which will influence the assessment of the positions and the plan of play. All this we will see in the analysis of the various examples, and all those various examples are beyond the scope of this video. So basically, what's the key here? Key rule is improve the position of your pieces. In this case, white's king and knight. His knight's loose. He's got to take care of it, right? Well, I think white starts misfiring right away. The first thing to do is just park it on a square, like c3, where it's not being bothered. Or white could play e4. Well, maybe not. He's probably going to lose that pawn. Bishop takes, king out. Yep, you're going to lose the pawn. Dang it. Okay, so the winning strategy starts with knight c3. Now, the king is tied down to guarding g3, but we can deal with that soon enough. Or g2. We can put it on g3. But consider this. Eventually, white can get a passed pawn, and it's going to be a passed e-pawn. Eventually, these pawns will come up the board, and it's at some point white's going to end up with a passed pawn. And when the 2 pawns get traded on both sides, then you're back into the type of position that I said. There's a whole chapter on knight and 2 pawns versus knight and bishop, and then you go find the winning method from there. So that's how you start. So the first order of business for white is to secure his knight where it's near his army, not throw it down the board where it's going to take a while to come back, and then activate the king. So white obviously had no knowledge of this ending, and we'll see what happens. Knight c7, bishop c6. And there's the knight. Black's restricted him a little bit, so there's the knight on the edge of the board, not doing him a lot of good. Now, that might be a mistake, f5, because you want your pawns on the opposite color of your bishop. They cut the mobility down, and it's providing outposts for white's pieces. Like, I would love to have this knight on f4 supported by this pawn on h4, because you're going to have trouble kicking it out of there. Okay? Or f4 would be a good square for my king also, with the pawn on h4, keeping you from driving me out, maybe. So don't put your pawns on the color of your bishop, okay? Get them on the opposite color. What was good for black here was just leave the pawn there. Since white's not getting his king dancing into the center like he should, time for black to do that. Get some positional compensation here. Make it hard for white to enter your position. Okay, so f5 I think is a mistake. f3. Now here white's making a mistake. He's putting a pawn on the color of the bishop. Wrong. Wrong move. Wrong. Wrong. Okay, back it up. Yeah, you want to free the king. Do it this way. Get both pawns up on black squares. Okay? Black's not going to attack those pawns at all. They're safe. White's got free reign here, and eventually he'll activate his king and use his knight and try and drive the black pieces back and force a pass pawn and start following the methods that I've read to you. Okay, so f3, that's a mistake. Now, I said I'm saying it's probably a technical win. With accurate play, black probably could draw too. We don't know. But who has the winning chances? White does. Who has chances to go wrong? Black does. When you're playing a real game, or sitting down face to face with somebody, tournament game, maybe you're a half point behind him, and it's the last round. If you beat him, you get a nice prize, and if you don't beat him, you still get a prize, but not so nice a one. Okay, well, you're gonna be playing for the win, obviously, right? Got to be prepared to play the best moves. So now here, at some point, it looks like white will be able to create a pass pawn, but he's got to get his guys out. And now he spends time getting this knight redeployed. Now, when is that king going to get in play? There was no need to move this knight. There was no need. Just leave it there. What's black going to attack it with? His king? Fine, send his king over there. I'll get my king in the center. Okay, so knight c2, mistake. Now black's getting his king active. And now finally white realizes I better get my king in the game. And this is too early. Oh no, I'm sorry. I thought that was a white move. f4. That might be a mistake. It's right to get the pawns on the opposite color bishop, but this gives white a chance to make a pass pawn right now, and I want to consider this move. I haven't really evaluated this. I was considering this already, and I was wondering if white had a winning strategy here, and I was putting in my mind, how do you want to place your pieces? Well, it's obvious you have to activate the king, but the moment the king gets active, you've got to watch out for this bishop getting down to f1 and eating up your pawns from behind. So how do we prevent that? Well, the way I saw, I get this knight to d2. If you do that, the knight on d2 is unassailable. Black's not getting rid of it. It may not be doable. You know, there's a possibility that black, since he can control this diagonal, keep the king from slipping across the board. But who knows? So let's just try to concoct a plan here. Let's see if we can do that. Okay, here's the obvious move. If we try to get the knight to d2 too quick, black's going to get in here. So let's look at this. Now is the time to play here. So the point being that if king d2, we get bishop f1 in. So let's try it. Let's just try it and see what happens. Now I want this knight on d2 keeping you out of there, but instead I'm having to play here now. Okay, looks like black has a very active king, so maybe the plan I want isn't feasible. I wasn't sure. I don't think you can reach a position where black can steal that g pawn and white can run the king over and trap it, because it's got an escape square h3, which also happens to win another pawn. So maybe you just don't have enough. You know, white squandered so many knight moves he didn't, and not developed his king. Maybe he can't get this in. So let's see, king here, bishop there. So unfortunately, the white knight on c2 is stuck, keeping the king out. So, all rats, you know. Hey, we've heard that name before. Now you know kind of where the name came from. Okay, anyway. White could have had a pass pawn, but unfortunately, you see, he could have had his pawns on black squares. He put them on white squares, but it's worth a look. Okay, so what happened here? he didn't play e4. He took. Okay. Now this in itself isn't all that bad. Maybe we can get into one of those positions where the knight versus or knight and two pawns versus bishop and pawn. Now, again, the drawback in the white position is that his pawns are on white squares, and the king is still going to have trouble getting activated, much like in the other line. If king e2, bishop a6 check, king d2, bishop f1, you're stuck to defending with the knight. So that kind of explains white's next move. Now he's unfortunately trading pawns off, and he's just got too many pawns stuck on white. And then there they are stuck, and there's really no hope in taking on f4. White's running out of pawns, and I don't think this kind of is the kind of position had he taken where the knight and two pawns beats the pawn. I don't think it's anywhere close. So in all this ending, white's managed to move his king once. Black has gotten his king right in the middle of the board where it belongs. So black is outplaying white in this ending down a pawn. Kind of humorous, huh? Okay, so they just kind of wiggle back and forth a little bit here. Another pawn on white. Mercy. Now the knight's having to run over the other side of the board. Worth consideration. What's wrong with knight e2? That attacks a pawn and ties the king down. I don't think black can afford to trade. He's probably going to lose that ending. So knight e2 forces king d5. Now how do we improve our position? Or king e5. Now the king is forever tied down. How can we improve this position? Put the knight here and get it to h3. Okay, let's try it. Now it frees the king for a moment. Now the king's tied down again. Now we can chase the bishop. The bishop's got to move. I don't know if white can make any headway here or not. I'm just kind of playing. Hey, let's stay on that diagonal. The idea is somehow to get over here and encircle this, get to g7 and win this pawn. But the moment the king gets too active, that bishop is going to go menace f3. Yeah, I don't think you can make it. It's good exercise. I'm going to try and prove it here. It's a good way to learn endings. Play that position out. Probably a draw, because white's just got too many pawns on white squares. So let's see where we went to. Knight e, get back. Okay, you didn't play knight e2. You played knight b3. Knight went to b3. Okay. So they just kind of dance back and forth a little bit. And now the white king position still hasn't improved. And he says, okay, so now I have devised, let's see, just note. Okay, so now I've devised the plan I ended up executing. It's probably self-evident to higher-rated players, but I was excited to find it. Well, yeah, good. His basic idea is get rid of the white pawns, and that's what he does. He does it very nicely. Okay, so king e2. I knew white was going to come in with the king, as he had no other choice to attack me, and why white's waiting so long is what cost him his winning chances. King d3. Now he hits that, and so it goes. Now the king comes up, and then black just sacrifices his bishop, and white can't stop the pawns from going. It's kind of interesting. This is a stalemate. Got a cute little stalemate there. I was wondering if maybe it's one of these positions, you got to be careful, where the king and knight beat the king and pawn. You force the king up the board and checkmate him, but it's not one of them. That's stalemate, isn't it? Neither pawn can move because they're blocked, and h4 is covered. But unfortunately, we can't drive this king forward. Well, maybe we can't. No, we can't. I was thinking knight here, but the king gets out. We can't trap that king. There are some endings where, you say you need a knight can't beat a king. Well, it can, if one side's stuck with a pawn, because the king gets stuck on the 8th rank in the corner, and his pawn is on the 7th rank behind it. He gets checkmated, but it's not one of those positions. As I say, I never know how long these videos are going to last, and I love talking about chess, and this is a long one, so it's going to keep you busy. But there's a lot here, and here he closes. He says, I was pretty happy about that, especially since my game with White, I was able to beat him, so good job there. As I said, before I believe taking my time on the moves, hours of analysis is necessary, especially nearing in the endgame was crucial to my draw. I'm getting some great results in correspondence-based chess, and it's teaching me a lot. So thank you for pointing me in the right direction. Well, of course, you're welcome. It's all common information. There's many roads to masterhood. This is the method that worked for me. I learned to analyze by playing a lot of postal chess, and what better thing for me to teach than this? And excuse me, I swallowed wrong. Okay, so very good game. I think it's self-evident too that a player with a 1600 game can play close to 2000 strength in this game. He just didn't understand the concept of the hanging pawns that I pointed out, and he made a couple other little slips, trading on d2 and getting rid of the bishop on d6 for the knight on c5. There's certainly potential here, and you'll only get better with more experience. So congratulations on a very nice game. One of the whole purposes of this series, it's kind of lost in the shuffle now. I didn't start the thread. I posted on the group wall. I want to get to know more about everybody in here. Somebody start a game, start a thread, whatever I called it. Members, post your best game at chess here. Post your best game at chess here. I said, use this title. You're going to be the first one that gets a video made. And Navatsam posted his, and he got the first video. And then I got behind because of a move, and then my birthday came in, and I got sick, and a few things have thrown me behind, but I'm getting caught up. They're all going to get presented. But I never know how long each one's going to be, and I've had longer videos than this, but it's my pleasure to do this because I enjoy and sharing the information. You watch the video, you're going to learn something, and this whole series I think is invaluable. If you guys haven't, if you want to get better and want to watch them all, by all means do so, because there's always going to be something new in them, and a lot of same principles come in. And clearly, Black took his time. I mean, he didn't make the right choice a few times, but that's okay. We're not expecting perfection, but this was a very, very well played game, and things will get better in this group. I've been starting team matches with 7-day time controls, and we're going to have a lot more of those, so that you guys can really, truly take your time, because you don't need to get a game over in a few days. You don't. Okay, take it from me. I spent 9 months to 2 years on domestic games. It's no big deal. That's where you learn, and you learn by analysis. Okay, can't think of anything else. I want to thank everyone for their time and for sitting through an hour and 10 minutes of this, which is almost reached, and hopefully you gained 50 rating points out of it, at least. Okay? All right. Take care, and we'll talk to you all soon with the next video. Bye for now.